Hello, everybody, and welcome to another social distance learning session brought to you by the Liberal Gun Club. Tonight, the bench doctor is going to be showing us one of my personal favorites. It's a Suomi submachine gun without the submachine part of it. It's no longer going to be select fire or full auto only, actually. This is currently being streamed out of Zoom to Twitch, Twitter, and Facebook. We can't stream to YouTube because they don't like it when we're handling firearms or doing anything about making firearms on the stream. We will put this up on YouTube later if Paul ever gets around to it. So everyone knows, all participants, but the moderators and the presenter, have their video shut off and are muted. If there are questions, please put them in the Discord Q&A channel or inside the Zoom chat. We have several people watching for questions at the various locations, but the easiest way to get your question answered is to become a member, sign into Zoom, and ask your questions live in chat. Becoming a member is inexpensive. It's only about $10 a year, and it brings other benefits with it. Feel free to join us in Discord after this. That's one of those benefits, having access to the LGC Discord. The link to Discord is now in the Zoom chat as soon as I hit enter. There we go. And now on to our local madman with a hammer. Scott, take it away.
Hey, welcome all. Here's the hammer, just in case. And for this project, I should have been more clear that really what I wanted to talk about was, building one of these things. A little background: the Suomi 31 is a 9mm submachine gun made by the Finns, and it was used during the Winter War, the continuation war, World War II, and it was used very, very effectively. And it's a simple closed or open bolt machine gun, and they're a really, really neat design, really well made, solid guns. But unfortunately, they can't be brought into the United States in their current or their native configuration, which is an open bolt full auto submachine gun. And I don't believe the ATF allows you to bring in open bolt semi-auto guns anymore because they're too easy to convert. So what you do is you import a kit from a decommissioned gun from Finland or wherever they source these things. And they have cut the receiver into 3 pieces, and then they throw it all in a box and send it to you. And you have the fun and enjoyment of figuring it out and putting it together. The directions, I got mine through Indianapolis Ordnance. I got the bolt kit and the receiver kit, the tube, the upper part of the receiver. I'll kind of go into that in a little bit from them with some directions that are abysmal. They leave out some really key information and key steps. So, if you have any questions, if you decide to do one of these and you have any questions, hit us up on Discord because it can be really, really confusing. They leave out so much important information. But these were made by the company that went on to become the modern firearms manufacturer, Tikka. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. That's the way I've always pronounced it. And so the company that originated, that started producing these is still around. It was if I'm not mistaken, it was a private citizen that sat down and designed the thing, and he just couldn't produce them fast enough to supply the Finn army. So Tikka stepped in. I don't know if the government, had something to do with that, but they were the main manufacturer of these things. They're pretty neat. I'll sort of half assemble it for you. This is when they say the receiver on one of these, they're talking about these 2 pieces right here that are mated together. They're actually considered one piece when the gun is constructed. So this would be a receiver. And on the full auto guns, this upper tube is a bigger diameter. And what they do is they send you the tube and a bolt kit. So they've reconfigured the bolt to work differently. So you have to then take this tube. It comes as just a bare tube, and you have to mill out these channels. This is the top or no, this is the bottom where your fire control group mates up to it. This is where your magazine clips in. And then this is the top where your top sight, your rear sight screws down in. And then that rear sight also has the added function of keeping the bolt from over traveling and keeping it from rotating. So you get this tube and it comes wrapped with a guide on it as to where to mill. And this thing is thick. It's a good, I don't know, maybe 3/8 of an inch thick in most places. So, you know, if you wanted to do it with a Dremel tool, it's going to take you forever. I don't suggest it, honestly. You know, you can if you're a glutton and you have all the time in the world. But I used a milling machine, and even that took a fair bit of time because you have to cut. You mill out what you can, and then you have to do these sides at a specific angle. More importantly, on the bottom where the magazine goes in. Otherwise, it won't feed properly, and the magazine won't seat. So it's a bit of a chore to do, and I can't imagine trying to do that with a Dremel by hand. And it took me several evenings of coming out to the shop and tinkering around and getting things set up to mill this part. And I thought this was the most difficult part, but really what happens when you get it is you get this lower receiver with the old tube. You know, it's all integrated, it's all welded together, and they just cut the old tube in half or into chunks. And you then have to take this receiver and you have to mill it down and get all of that old material off. But they don't give you this dimension here. So it's really difficult to tell when to stop. You know, you don't want to go too low. But as you get toward the bottom, it starts to become fairly clear as to how much material you want to remove. So you have to take all that off. And then you also have this as your front lockdown piece. And this has, you know, material like that on it, and you have to mill this off. I took a saw, electric bandsaw, and cut as much as I could before I started milling. But that gives you some idea of the thickness of that front tube, you know, just how thick that thing was. So you imagine trying to go at that with a Dremel. So this corresponds to these lugs on the front of the barrel. So that's that piece that was mated up to that front locking block. So that's the first thing you have to do is you have to mill all of the, you know, kind of basically mill all these pieces out of the scrap. And they also don't mention it, but it's important that on this piece, there is a piece that has a saddle on it up here that saddles the bolt. I mean, the tube. So it sits kind of in here like that, and there's a saddle. Well, that saddle has two legs that come down and go into kind of like a notch on both sides here. You can't just omit those two legs. So what you end up having to do is cutting them off and then shaping them to fit back in here, because this is the piece that locks the barrel on. And it also gives you your barrel orientation with this little notch here. So you have to go really slow, and you really have to think and analyze your way through one of these. You know, if you're doing a kit gun, if you're going to just want to build a gun to start with, I would get an AR-15 and assemble an AR-15, and then you'll have a better understanding of how a gun is supposed to work. Then maybe do an AK-47, which is more challenging. And then getting into something like this is going to take a lot more time and tooling than any other kit gun. So, you know, these are cheap. You could pick these kits up for less than $200 and like, wow, I could build a cool gun for $200. But then you've got to buy the tube, which is $250. And then you've got to buy the bolt kit, because you can convert the old bolts, but you know, you'd have to throw this in a lathe and lathe it down and you know, change the whole firing system in it. So, it's probably not worth your time to try that. So, by the time you're done with it, you're into $600 or $700 worth of parts on one of these. So it's not for the faint of heart to tackle one, but it is a pretty neat project and it will test you. This is what the new bolt looks like. So it uses an AR-15 firing pin, and you have a recoil spring and a hammer spring back here. And then you have this little protrusion up here on the top. And this is what, when you pull your charging handle, that's what it's pulling back on, and it's compressing these springs. But you can see it's quite a bit different than the old bolt. So this is your new one, and this is your old one. So you'd have to do quite a bit of work to make this into a closed bolt type weapon. And there are people that sell kits out there to do that. But, like a $169 Suomi kit seems cheap and easy, but it's really not. So once you get that done, then you start milling your tube and test fitting. And test fitting is really critical with this kit to make sure everything lines up and, get your micrometers and calipers out and keep measuring until you get things to fit snugly in the way you want. You then have to take apart this, which is all pinned and welded. So some of these pins you can just knock right out, but you take this whole piece apart, you have to weld a special block down in here to keep you from converting it to a full auto gun. And then you have to put in your trigger and this sear. This is your sear right here, and this is your sear surface. The directions don't tell you how to do this, though. They just tell you to put it back together, but they don't give you the instructions on how to get the trigger out or how to orient anything. So it's kind of an adventure. But if you have some knowledge of how guns work, you can figure it out. You sort of intuitively know what's supposed to happen. Or you could go online, and there really isn't that much information online in various forums of how to do these. I've seen a lot of them that were completed, but not a lot of them that give you the details that you need. Down here is your safety. This clicks back and forth, and I still have to hook that up. I'm still in the process of working on this thing. And then your stock, this drops down in your stock here, like so. This is your charging handle up here, back here. Your tube then mates up here. Let me get this lined up like that. And then a neat feature of these guns is you can swap the barrels out really quickly. This is the barrel, and it just goes right in here and aligns. So there's the gun fully barreled, and then it comes with a barrel shroud. And then this barrel shroud is what holds it all together. So I'll show you down here. You see on here, you see this bump. Getting used to the new camera and the new camera angle, but you have this bump right here, and this is the lock that locks into that. So get this set up. So you can see that it fits right here, and then this is your barrel release. So you just flip this lever around and it locks. It locks this intersection right here where this notch is to that protrusion on the barrel shroud. And then you flip that and you can swap the barrel out in seconds on one of these. So it's a really, really neat, cool design. But it is a heck of a lot of work. But let's see, what else? What other pieces do we have? This is your front sight. This is pretty straightforward. It just, looks like some of the Enfield sights, but it's got the graduations on it. I'm not sure. It must be in meters, I would think. It looks like it goes up to 500 meters. Good luck shooting a 9mm submachine gun at 500 yards accurately. I applaud you if you can do it. I would. The Finns were pretty good with these guns, but I don't know if they were that good. Here's the magazine right here, and you can get drum mags for these. I've ordered one, but I don't have one, and that's part of the magic of fitting these parts. Is this lower mag well needs to be, the magazine fits pretty straightforwardly in there, but it needs to be cut wide enough to accommodate the drum. And fortunately, my friend has a drum, so I was able to test fit it using the drum. But I would suggest, if you're going to do it, get the drum and the mag so that you can test fit with that drum. Otherwise, you're going to have to come back, take it all apart. And this gun is all welded together. It's like this tube is going to be welded. Get this piece out. Take this thing apart here. So this tube is going to get welded onto this lower receiver. So this goes on here. So you have to get this all aligned. You have to get this gap perfectly. And then you just come along and you just tack weld it. You don't run along full bead down here because you'll warp the side panels on this lower. But you just, you run like a little 1-inch bead in 2 or 3 places once you have it all set up. So what I've done many times is I've clamped this together with some C-clamps and test fit everything and work the action to make sure that everything is set properly. And then once everything is dialed in, I'm still waiting on an extractor for this, because the one I have, you salvage that off of your old bolt. You salvage a few pieces off the old bolt, and the one that I had was cracked in half, so I had to order another one. And so once that's all test fitted, you weld it together. I would not recommend just doing all of your milling and welding it, because you have to get that relationship between the sear and the bolt just right. If it's too shallow, of course, it's not going to engage. And if it's too deep, it's going to hang up and the bolt won't close properly. So it's a fair bit of work. But I do, if you have a sense of adventure and you're fairly proficient with more than standard household grinding wheels and Dremels, I'd say tackle it. It's a lot of fun. So, are any questions so far?
Yes, there were a couple, actually one from the other night, which was answered via email, but I figured it'd be a good time to ask it here. This is semi-auto only for a reason. And for civilians, you cannot build this into a select fire, fully auto, etc. Could you just expand on that a little bit, please?
Yeah. So your average U.S. citizen is allowed to build guns for private use. You're not allowed to build them to sell them. That makes you a manufacturer. And part of the restrictions are that you can't build full auto guns, and you also, in a lot of cases, like the full auto receiver tube is just a gun part, but they won't sell you the full auto tube unless you are a Type 7 FFL with the proper SOT. So I could build one full auto, get the parts, and it'd probably be a lot simpler because I don't have to mess around with, changing the bolt out and all that stuff. But they will not sell you the stuff to make it full auto. And then let's say I do build this as a manufacturing FFL and I make it into a full auto machine gun. I don't get to keep that gun. I can keep it as long as I maintain my FFL and SOT status. But as soon as I give up my SOT, then this gun has to be destroyed, or the full auto guns have to be destroyed or sold to another SOT holder. So it's not a backdoor way to add machine guns to the registry. You end up having to get rid of them when you get rid of your SOT. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Well, the main point was that you can't build, even if you somehow got full auto parts, it is illegal to build it yourself as a civilian.
Yeah, you can order, interestingly enough, all of the things to turn an AR-15 into a full auto gun. You can order the jig to drill the pin. You can order the auto sear and the hammer and the disconnector. You can possess all those things, but as soon as you drill that third pinhole, that's now constructive intent, and it's a felony. So as a civilian, you can own the parts on a lot of these guns, but you cannot put them in the gun. Kind of a silly thing, but that's the way it works. I don't know why I guess because there's so few suppliers on these full auto tubes and bolts that they can just restrict it and say we won't even sell it to you. But I think you can get full auto AK parts as well, but just do not drill the holes.
I see there's a raised hand. Katrina, would you type your question into the chat, please, and I can ask that for you. Constructive intent and everything else with the ATF, my understanding is every violation of the NFA is a 10-year prison sentence and a $10,000 fine.
Yeah. They don't take it lightly. They're pretty serious about that stuff. If they get wind of somebody building full auto guns without the proper credentials, they're showing up armed and kicking doors. They don't just knock and ask politely. They're very serious about that stuff. So, I mean, I'm just going to shut up there. And once again, none of us are lawyers, but the law is pretty clear on that point.
There are currently no questions on.
All right.
And I don't see one from Katrina, so I'm going to do what we normally don't and unmute her so she can ask the question directly.
Okay. Actually, she probably accidentally private messaged it to me. So her question was, can it be converted back to auto legally because the original gun was auto and is also CNR if you registered it with the ATF tax stamp?
No, because what you'd be doing is adding a full auto gun. That would be an attempt to add a full auto gun to the registry that was closed in 1986. Any machine gun made after May of 1986 can only be owned by military, police, and manufacturing FFLs. And so, yes, I could convert this back to full auto for my purposes, but it still has to be either converted back and give up the parts, the full auto parts, or those have to be sold when I give up my special occupation tax status. So there is no way that I am aware of to backdoor get a gun back, into the registry. So it's just flat not going to happen. They will. So what happens is if I make this full auto, as soon as the gun is finished, I fill out a Form 2 with the ATF to say, hey, I built this full auto Suomi 9mm. You're not asking for permission. You're just letting them know it exists. When you are done and you're going out of business, they're going to ask you what happened to all of those Form 2 guns that you built. And you either submit proof that you cut the thing up into as according to their regulations, or that you sold it to somebody or some agency that's allowed to have full auto guns. So that's why these things are so much work, these Suomis, that I can't imagine building a full auto one and then having to give it all up later on. There are enough other guns out there that you can convert back and forth, like an AR-15. I have a full auto AR-15, but I can salvage everything off of that gun except the lower receiver. So I'm really only giving up $39 when I go out of business on that gun, versus hundreds of dollars and many hours worth of work to give up a Suomi. So that's the reason I didn't do this one.
I would assume, and maybe Kyle or someone else can speak to this, but I would assume it's like a cultural heritage desire to own like an original one.
Yeah.
For people who have ancestry from that time. So
yeah, or fellow Finnophiles. And Scott, there's one other thing I wanted to mention there. Even though the firearm that you get when you buy a kit isn't a firearm, and it's all of that's backdated, there is no receiver piece that would qualify as a firearm, so it can't be pre-86, right? Like, you are building a new gun from old parts.
Yeah.
Which is why it can't go on the rolls. One of the reasons why.
Yeah. The only kind of weird exception to that is if you have an auto sear made pre-86, you can put that drop-in auto sear in any AR-15 and run it and turn it into a machine gun and then convert it back. But drop-in auto sears is the only other way I know that would work.
Well, there are other exceptions like the HK sear pack, or the trigger pack, I should say. But
yeah, and then there's the lightning links and things like that. But even that part had to exist pre-86 unless you're a manufacturer. But you could take a pre-86 auto sear and drop it in a 2022 AR. You can do that. But that's the only weird loophole in that whole thing.
Yep. I don't have any other questions in my list. I don't see any other questions in chat.
Yeah.
Katrina, I hope that answered your question. If there's anything else, please throw it in chat right now.
Yeah. And this is as close as you're going to get. A CNR really has no bearing on that particular law. So, a greater than 50-year-old gun that's full auto is still full auto, and it's still the full auto laws trump the CNR laws. So, you couldn't do that. You could, and then once you build one of these, your kit would be a CNR kit, but as soon as you build one of these, this is a new receiver. So now it's no longer CNR because it's not the original gun as it was originally outfitted. So this then loses its CNR status as soon as you do it. But I'm not trying to discourage people from building these things. I just want to give you a realistic expectation of what it takes to do it. It's not as simple as, even an AK is relatively simple compared to one of these, because with an HK, you need to have some tools to, jigs and things like that, and big hammers, and, be able to use rivets, but it doesn't require nearly as much specialized equipment like a mill to do them properly. But there are a lot of guns like this out there. They're kit guns. You can do a Sten, which that will be my next one, and they're super simple. And that's a simple kit gun that you could build at home. I've seen the tubes done with a Dremel, and it doesn't come out too bad because it's not as thick. It's just that. It's just a thin tube. This is more like a chunk of pipe. I mean, you can see how thick the walls are on that thing. But it is really rewarding, and you will learn a ton going through this process. I know a fair bit about guns, and I've worked on a lot of different guns, but it really is a neat exercise, and it forces you to really think your way through very methodically what you're doing on one of these. But if you got a hankering to build one, get an AK kit, just an AK-47 kit, and you can usually borrow the tools and jigs and things like that to build one. And they're a lot of fun. And the nice thing about them is if you screw up, parts are available. You can get a new trunnion, or unless you're building some weird oddball variant of it, even then the parts are available. They're just not going to be as cheap. But a Suomi parts are not cheap, and they're sort of sporadically available. They seem to come into the country in batches, and I can't find any kits available right now. But they'll come in batches. You'll see you'll see a few hundred be available, and then poof, they're gone. And so they kind of come and go. Some guns are that way, I guess. I don't know if the Finns are the ones decommissioning these things, but they probably just decommission them as they come in from wherever they have them. But this gun was used, if not mistaken, all the way up into the 70s, because it's just so good. It's so well engineered. It's a heavy boy. It's chunky, but that's part of the allure of them is when you shoot them, it's really easy to keep them level because there's so much mass in the receiver and the barrel shroud and all that. But Yeah. Anyway, I just thought it's kind of a neat gun. It's an important gun historically, because if you have read about the Winter War and the Continuation War, you know how much fight the Finns gave the Russians, stopped them dead in their tracks. And I remember the Russian general, when they asked him after the war, the Continuation War, they said, how was it? He said, well, we conquered enough land to bury our dead. It was that rough on them. The Finns just tore them up with these and Mosin-Nagants. So it's, historically, I like them for that reason. They're just really important guns. And I love World War II guns. So.
Well, thank you, Scott, or as they say in Finland, kiitos.
Ah.
For your information, the gun was in active service until 1980s, and it finally was removed from the reserve in 98.